3G licensing, then the fiscal contraction wasn't as much.
That's the real nut of the problem, isn't it? The politics and those political scandals, is that going to complicate decision making?
Definitely, because for one, the political capital has been diminished, and with about 4 state elections and 1 federal election coming up, what's going to happen is that the government will find themselves under a lot of pressure to ease the burden of increasing prices on the ground, and that means that fiscal policy will shift all of inflation burden, almost all of it, to the monetary authorities, and that's not going to be an easy game to play.
So, Tony, what Vish is saying. Fair, agreed. Does China have the edge controlling inflation prices?
I think for now, China has the edge. I think in the budget announced, there's been investment that's planned for infrastructure and for agriculture. Those should relieve some of the supply shocks and should make some of the kind of supply chain issues in India, should provide some relief for that.
Okay.
So, there really is not a true highway system in India of any kind of much use across the country as you have in China, and local roadways are not really usable.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, investment in infrastructure underinvested in India. We know that, but I mean, highways don't pop up overnight. This is going to take some time.
Absolutely.
Before it actually starts to ease the supply side constraints. No,
it does take time, and people have been talking about increasing investment in India, infrastructure investment in India, for a long, long time. With ports and roads and all sorts of investment. You look at the Delhi Metro and all these other things. I think the issue with investment in India is what we saw with the Commonwealth Games last summer. That's a real concern for everybody. I think there has been a little more discussion about private investment in India as well as a part of the budget. So it'll be interesting to see how long those announcements take effect and what the impact really is on these supply shocks.
What is the situation here? I mean, PPPs, public-private partnerships, turnkey contracts, etc., with huge infrastructure projects. I mean, that's sort of, the no-brainer model. I mean, with India, what's the problem?
I think it moves back to issues of transparency and governance, because even with the private-public partnership, transparency is a huge issue, and that's what happened with the telecom scandal as well. There's talk of cronyism and whatnot, and so confidence has been diminished quite a bit.
So, Tony, do you think that inflation in China is close to peaking, or does the central bank still have a lot of heavy lifting to do on rates in this current cycle?
I think there is definitely more action to be taken on rates. I think as the currency is liberalized as well, I think that will have an impact on inflation. But I don't think they're at the end of the rate rising cycle or even the reserve requirement cycle for loans. Loans are down, I think, 26% year on year in January. So they're taking action, but the question is, are they taking dramatic enough action? They're worried, right? They don't want to choke off the
Especially with
the
real
economy.
interest rates still negative.
Right, exactly. But they don't want to choke it off. They want to make sure it's gradual. They don't want a downside shock within their own economy.
I mean, they're erring on the side of conservatism. I mean, the last thing they want is a hard landing, right? That has social implications. Yeah.
Especially with all of the headwinds in the developed countries, right? You have the sovereign crisis in Europe. You still have overhang of the housing crisis in the States.
Key markets.
Right, and you have QE2 continuing to go, impacting overseas markets, the money supply in overseas markets. So China's increased its money supply by 52% over the last 2 years. That's had a real impact on inflation, right? And some of these inflationary issues right now are more supply side issues. They're more supply shocks. So you look at food in Australia, you look at wheat in the former Soviet Union, you look at oil. These are all supply shocks. What we had in 2008 was a demand pull for inflation. This is very different.
Drivers.
Right.
Understood. Okay, listen, we got to go. Vish, thanks for dropping by. We'll see you again soon. I hope Vish Tuvarathan on Capital Economics Asia. And we'll get back to Tony for the last word. Tony Nash from the Economist Intelligence Unit. Coming up on Squawk Asia this Wednesday. Today, March the 2nd, Apple told us to market to make a date. Anyway, find out why when Squawk comes right back. Don't go away.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. First in business worldwide.
Okay, this one's for the Apple faithful. Later today, Apple widely expected to pull the wraps off the iPad 2.0 at a highly anticipated media event. But with a growing number of tablets for consumers to choose from, can Apple impress? CNBC's John Fort has more.
Apple's big iPad 2 announcement in just a few hours. Let's jam through the basics. We're expecting a thinner, lighter iPad with battery life at least as good, a new custom A5 chips from Apple perhaps, and cameras to enable video conferencing. Now, this is a big deal for Apple because the company last quarter sold 7.3 million iPads, nearly one iPad for every 2 iPhones, at an average price of $600. iPad contributed 16.4% of Apple's $26.7 billion in revenue. Now, if this new version and the software and services that come with it keep sales growing, the iPad could quickly become a major financial force. How major? A little perspective. Last quarter, the iPad alone did $1 billion more revenue than Dell's entire consumer PC business. Now, assuming the iPad 2 does well and has what we expect, what's the impact on Apple's rivals? Believe it or not, it's actually good for Qualcomm and NVIDIA, who supply chips to Apple's competitors. When Apple raises the bar, it stokes demand for their latest Snapdragon and Tegra chips. Samsung and Motorola have the most skin in the tablet game so far. Motorola CEO Sanjay Jha said initial sales of Motorola Xoom have been strong. If the new iPad beats the Xoom on features and price, and it might, that would clearly hurt. It would also hurt Google, whose Android OS powers those rivals. A strong iPad 2 debut could be the toughest on PC incumbents. Microsoft, Intel, HP, all three saw consumer weakness over the holidays while iPad went to town. If iPad keeps growing, it'll probably be eating their lunch. We'll see tomorrow if Apple's got the goods to do it. For CNBC Asia, I'm John Fort.
Interesting stuff. Tony Nash back with us, economist and intelligence. We're talking during the break. You're not an Apple guy, right?
No, I don't use iPad.
Your PCs, your Windows, your BlackBerry. I mean, that's sort of how the world is breaking down into almost two halves, isn't it?
A bit, yeah. I mean, it's. I think you have your corporate PC users. I was just in the UK a couple weeks ago, and somebody was telling me that the teen demographic in the UK is really starting to use BlackBerry in a big way. Oh. So this guy is a parent. He has 3 daughters. And he said that all of his kids are starting to use BlackBerries. He had thought they would want iPhones, but they're really starting to use BlackBerries.
And conversely, what we're seeing is a more enterprise adoption of the iPhone, right?
Right.
Yeah.
iPhone and iPad. I mean, a lot of the IT heads in companies are having to, because the executives want to use iPads, they're having to tailor the applications for iPads.
Does that make sense? Because, I mean, the whole philosophy of the iPad is what, I guess, tech people call lean back computing.
Right. That's right.
Right, as opposed to lean forward on a desk,
right,
whether it's a box or a laptop. Does that sort of form make sense to you in a corporate environment?
It's definitely spillover. Right? It's definitely spillover, and I think it's when people want a seamless kind of personal to work environment, they bring their iPads in rather than bringing their laptops home. So I think I think there's spillover both ways.
Okay. Isn't Apple and the likes of Google just vastly overvalued? Aren't we heading for another .com crash?
I don't know. I don't really look at company valuations, but I mean they're definitely hardly valued, and really it remains to be seen whether or not they really deserve that value.
Indeed. Apple itself, though, post Steve Jobs, what hope?
Yeah, it's a heck of a transition they've got ahead. I think kind of putting the precision and the demand that Jobs has with the hype around Jobs, they're tough shoes to fill.
But there's still a lot in the Apple product pipeline.
Absolutely,
to sustain it.
Right. But is Apple about the product themselves, or are they about the persona of Steve Jobs? I think separating those two, I don't think it's impossible, but I think it might be a little bit difficult.
Probably more down to his ideas, his innovation, you know, the creativity, as well as the drive and the execution, because the man is just unsparing.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure he's budgeted for the environment after he leaves.
And if there are true product innovators in Apple outside of Steve Jobs, then they need to start bringing that up now and building those personalities now.
Plate. Indeed. Fantastic. Okay, listen, Tony, got to go.
Thank you.
Great to talk to you. Thanks for dropping by. We'll do it again very soon, I hope.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay, Tony Nash with us from the Economist Intelligence Unit around the desk here at the SGX.